For me, it's good morning. Welcome to the webinar. I'm pretty used to interactivity, so this will be a reach for me to speak. Let's see, so just to make sure, is everything working okay on your end?
Yes, it's perfectly fine. We can see your screen and we can hear you.
Okay, great. So today we're going to talk about managing performance. Hopefully you're going to see some things in a different light. Performance management is often viewed as kind of a once-a-year thing and not really used as effectively as it should or could be. And I hope to just enlighten you. This is a pretty brief webinar, 40 minutes. So I'm going to run right through this stuff, but hopefully I'll touch on some things that will shed some light, and we can get some questions and answers going at the end, and we can learn some things together. So first things first, I'd like to talk about 3 different case studies. I'm not going to get too deep into them at this point, but I'm just going to throw them out there for your consideration. So an employee description, you have an employee that is very professional, technically proficient. He's what you might consider your model employee. You would like others to be like him, engaged with peers, with managers. He's very well respected. He is an influential person in your group. He is a natural leader as your employee. What kind or what does performance management look like with that employee? Moving on to the second one. You have an employee that comes to work on time. He or she meets your expectations. They train when they're required to train, but don't necessarily do it if they're not asked to. Their skills are good, but they could be sharpened a little bit. They could be better. He complains about technology and change. So as new things come into the company, they're a little bit resistant, but they eventually come around. And occasionally they'll call in sick. Just the one-timer, and if there's something great going on, you know that they're maybe not going to show up to work. What does that performance management look like? And then the third, you have an employee that seems to be chronically ill. The skills are definitely not there. They're not that great. They probably were never as sharp as you would like them. As soon as they earn personal time off, they use it. They have a zero balance of leave in sick leave and in personal time off. They're usually or often tardy. They're unhappy with everything. And they're a break abuser, meaning that when they get their coffee break in the morning, instead of a 15-minute break, it stretches to 20, even 30 minutes of a break because they're slow to come back, and they often have to go right back to the bathroom after they come back from their break, etc. They have a language problem. They have bad language, and they're a cancer at work. Their attitude spreads. And so what does performance management look like for that employee? So obviously I've given you 3 different, very different people to look at and think about. I'm sure that most of us on this webinar can relate to all 3 of those. You've had, or you now have employees that fit that description pretty well. So let's get into defining what performance management looks like. And as we do, let's talk just a little bit about the who. Who is it that needs their performance management or managed? Is it just your employees, or is it also you? How does that work, and what does performance management look like? How do we actually do it? When do we do it? What's the repetition? Do we do it often? Do we only do it once a year when our HR department says we have to do it? And where do we do it? Do we do it in the workplace? Do we do it off to the side? Do we do it so others can hear? Do we do it in private? Do we do it in a private office? All those considerations we're going to talk about today. So here's another question for you as we get rolling here to start the thinking processes. Is performance management a leadership activity or is it a management activity? And without going too far into leadership and management definitions, leadership being we're leading people, we're trying to encourage and influence and inspire people, whereas management, we're using our command and control that is given our title and authority in the organization. So we're managing people. We're making them do what we want them to do. So performance management is often viewed as a management activity, but I hope to show you by the end that it's more of a leadership activity. And along those lines, we manage programs quite typically, but we lead people. So that would be the distinction for me in the way that my mind works. When I think about programs and budgets and all the kind of things that we do and produce in an organization, we can manage those things. When it comes to people, we really need to lead them because people don't like to be managed typically. They'd rather have that freedom, that autonomy to make their own decisions as much as possible. And so now let's get into understanding the employees a little bit. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to bring up four. The first one is the Cubby Graph of engagement. Cubby used graphs a lot, so I'm talking about Stephen R. Covey, and this particular graph comes out of his book of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And Covey's graph talks about how there's 2 axes, the attitude axes and the productivity axes. So are your employees, and in fact, let's talk about, is this just about your employees? No, it's also about you and where you fit into your organization, and are you engaged with your organization and your job? But are we productive? So do we actually produce? This is a very objective because I can measure how much you actually produce. Do you produce 10 widgets? If you're manufacturing automobiles, are you manufacturing 20 automobiles per month? Those are things that I can measure. However, the attitude axis is subjective and it's an opinion. It's how I feel about you and how you feel about the organization. So those 2 things together make you an engaged employee if you're doing well. I add color to the graph to make it easier to talk about. So if you are a blue employee in the blue square there on my graph, then that would be great because you have a good attitude and you're very productive in our organization. However, if you're green, then I like you because you have a good attitude and I feel good about you. However, your productivity is less than what I would consider ideal or what I need from you. And so you're a green employee. If you are a yellow employee, it would mean that, gosh, you know, your productivity is there. However, you're just not, I just don't like you that well. You kind of have a bad attitude. You're not very engaged with the organization. You don't really like your job, perhaps. You're tired of your job. And then, of course, the red. The red employee, this is a very interesting one because a red employee is, I have to ask people all the time when I talk to them and I do some executive coaching. When they label someone as a red employee, I have to ask them, why are they doing what they're doing? Or perhaps even, why do you employ them? Sometimes red employees can be your brother or your cousin or your wife's brother or your next door neighbor, and you're just not going to get rid of them. So sometimes you do have red employees, but oftentimes they're not productive, so they're not helping you, and their attitude is bad. So why are we keeping them around, especially in the role that they're in right now? So who typically? Blue employees, you got great employees, you got your stars, the ones that you want everybody else to be like. A green employee, quite typically this would be your newer employee that hasn't quite learned how to do his job, perform his duty, and produce at the level you'd like. However, they have a great attitude. I love my new job. I love the fact that I'm working for this company. I love my boss. Those would be common things. So And then the yellow employee. A yellow employee quite typically could be described as a tenured employee, someone that's been there for 10, 15, even 20 years, knows how to do their job, produces adequately, so at least makes the quota or the expectation of what you would want them to produce. However, their attitude is bad, and so that would be your tenured employee. I hate this job. I want to go somewhere else. I wish I had done something else. I wish I had more education so I could take another job. And then, of course, again, your red employee. Keep in mind that this particular graph is very fluid, meaning that people move in and out of things all the time. And so what I do when I'm teaching a management class with this graph, I tell people, take a list, take this graph and put it down, or get it at least a mental picture for you if you can memorize it, and then put a list of your employees. So this would be a list of my employees, and I put this and I say, all right, there's John Smith. Where is John Smith fitting in my graph today? Well, John's my star. He's always got a great attitude. He's always overachieving. He's my blue employee. There's Dan Jones. Dan Jones. Now, you know what? Dan is my brand new employee. He really likes his job, but he's not producing as well as they could be. There's Mary. Mary's my yellow employee. She is, and et cetera, et cetera. So you put these people in these graphs, and you can start to see, oh, well, this is where they are and where they fit. And now, just as a little final thought here, how do we improve their engagement? Because that's part of our role as a manager. We want them to produce more. We want them to be happy at work. And so how do we improve them? We do it by simply, if they're blue, we reward them. If they're green, they need training. They need to learn how to do their job. Not necessarily provided by the manager, but arranged at least by the manager and identified by the manager. Coaching. Coaching if they're yellow, because we're going to coach up their attitude. That is done principally by the manager. It is in a session where you sit down, and it is perspective, and it is identification, and it is motivation. So you're going to say, you know what? This is what I see. This is what I'd like to see, and I know that you can do that kind of thing. So you're going to identify it. There's a really odd thing about people that are in yellow. They often do not see themselves as yellow employees, because often what we talk about in our organization is produce, 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 quota, quota, quota. If you do your quota, then you're a good employee. As we talk more and more about that, then they believe that as long as they're making their quota, they are keeping you and the organization happy. Attitude is not part of that. We don't talk about attitude very much. And so as long as you don't give them that perspective of, you know what, every time we have a meeting, a team meeting, and we get together, and I say, come on, team, let's go, you sit at the back, you cross your arms and legs, you roll your eyes, and you don't participate. And that is a bad attitude. They don't know they're doing that, and they definitely don't know that others are watching them. Here's how the cancer works. That person that's yellow is a cancer to your organization, because a green employee that's trying to produce, trying to learn how to do their job, is watching the yellow employee. And guess what they're seeing? Yes, they're seeing how to produce, but they're also seeing, oh, I can sit in the back of the room, cross my arms and legs, and roll my eyes when the boss tells me to do something, because that's what they feel like is good. Now, it is very important to understand that this graph is not just for your employees, it's also where am I. So after you do the thing about looking at your employees, now go back and say, oh, wow, where are my people? Where am I? Where do I fit? Because now you start to think about that. And am I actually a yellow employee? Because oftentimes, like I said, this is a fluid graph. We move around. Sometimes we're really happy with our job. Maybe we're a new supervisor. We don't know how to do our job very well. Maybe we've been there for 10 years and got passed up for a couple of raises, a couple of promotions, and so we drift from blue down to yellow. So we have to be careful about that. Number two, let's look at what do humans crave. So they crave recognition and praise. I refer to you to as Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This triangle is awesome. The physiological is basically food, safety is shelter. Those two things are kind of taken care of when we employ someone for the most part. However, the next bar, love and belonging, that level is cultural acceptance. Do they fit into our team? I tell you that a manager's role fits right there. They really need to feel like they belong to our organization. They want to belong to our organization. And then the very next step is like it, that they want to contribute to the organization and they want to get praise. They want to be recognized for contributing. So our role as a supervisor really fits in that love and belonging and self-esteem. That's really what we do as managers, is we make sure that people feel like they belong to an organization, how they fit, where they fit, what they do, and what they produce, and how that contributes to the overall success of the company. And then we praise them when they do it. We build their self-esteem. Self-actualization, not a lot of people get into self-actualization. If you're a manager, my bet is that you are a self-actualizer, because self-actualization is that independent, it's the ability to create, it's building a better mousetrap, it's being innovative in your organization, trying to get the very best, doing over and beyond, overachieving, doing more than what the expectation is. And when people get into that, we usually identify them and put them in management roles, because that's the person we want everybody else to be like, to emulate. So where do my employees fit? Again, most of your employees fit in the cultural acceptance and then being praised for their contributions. That's where they really fit. And then here's number 3. It's really important to understand as a manager that your success is our success, meaning that if your employees are successful, if they do their quotas and they produce what we're expecting them, that makes you successful as a manager. You, in fact, can't really be successful if your employees are not successful. If your employees are stumbling, if they're taking too many breaks, if they're not getting their job done, if they're not making their quotas, you're not making your quotas, and you're not looking good. There's a fear sometimes, because we have a natural tendency to be competitive as human beings. There's a fear that we don't want our employees to be too successful, because that would make me look bad. Just the opposite. If I can get my employees to look over successful, that makes me look good to my manager, because my job as a manager is to manage and lead people. It's not to produce widgets, not to produce automobiles or whatever it is that we're manufacturing. It is to produce producers or people. And then number 4, very important today, because we've run through this real technological boom, to understand that a 60-year employee is vastly different than a 20-year employee. A 20-year-old employee, that is. A 20-year-old, well, their technological abilities are incredible. They can usually write programs. They can do things that a 60-year-old, it's a tough learning curve for us guys that are older. But these younger employees, tech savvy, boy, they can blitz through things. But they need a lot more of employee management, praise. They've grown up with it, because us, the 50 and 60-year-olds, have raised a generation of people that get praise just for showing up. We tell them, we give them trophies. I often, when I talk about generational differences and I talk about the younger generation, I say, because in America, remember that soccer has not been a sport of great interest until the last few generations. So I make a joke, fun-friendly soccer, everybody gets a trophy. So in the United States of America, soccer has become this sport where all the kids are playing soccer. And we give them trophies just for participating. We give them rewards just because they've showed up. And I'm not sure how good that is. I kind of think it's not. But back when I played sports, You only got trophies and recognition and praise if you won, if you did really, really well. So things are changing, and that really affects how we manage our performance of our employees. So who are these people? We need to get to know who they are generationally. How do these people fit into our organization? What influenced their lives, and what inspires them to be bigger, better, faster, stronger today? And then what language do they speak? Not meaning English versus Spanish versus French, but more what kind of language do they speak? Do they communicate better through texting, through social media? If that's where they hang out and that's where they communicate and where they're more comfortable, then maybe we need to communicate with them at that level. Just as you wouldn't speak Spanish to a French person, you need to speak their language. Get on their level and speak with them. So there's a lot of differences there. So let's get in down to what the manager's role actually is. So a manager. What is it exactly that a manager does? I'd love to ask this question in a typical environment. I would throw this right out at the audience and say, tell me what you think. So a manager. We often think of managers as like the father figure or the mother figure of the organization, someone I can turn to, someone I can ask questions to, someone that's always going to be there for me, and someone that's going to clearly define what my expectation is and what I'm supposed to do. So part of that's true, but part of it's not really true. So I have done a lot of management training, years and years, more than 20 years of it. During that period of time, I've listened to people's groups' answers. I've interviewed countless CEOs, and I've come up with a kind of a very simplistic list of only four things that I think is what makes up a manager's role. Again, this is a pretty simple, but this is what I think a manager's role is. So first off, a manager's responsibility is foremost the safety and welfare of their employees. You notice that productivity is number 2, often again thought of as number 1, but really it's safety and welfare. You see, there's a couple of things playing here. If my employees get hurt at work, or they don't do well, or they get messed up somehow out of work because I haven't been inspiring them and getting them and motivating them to be better people, then in reality that's going to affect my productivity. So I have to consider safety first. And let's not discount the obvious too. If my people get hurt, then they're not obviously going to produce, which affects my productivity as a boss, and it also affects the productivity of the organization. Because now I've got an employee that is home on sick leave or workman's compensation, and they're having to take care of the injury that they sustained at work, and so my productivity has got to take a hit. I'm not going to produce what I could. So safety and welfare would be number 1. Number 2 would be the productivity of my employees. Do I actually produce? Am I producing at a level that people understand that the organization needs? My bosses and their bosses and those that are giving vision and direction to the organization from the C-level of employees, are my employees and my team producing? That's the productivity part. Are we being productive, and is it in line with what the organization expects and needs from me and my team? The third is to be an enabler. And an enabler kind of, in psychological terms, is a bad thing. In this term, it's a good thing. Because what we're talking about is providing training, providing resources to make my employees successful. Here's a quick example. So my blue employee, he can produce 150% of what I want him to every day. But if he runs out of staples, or if he runs out of paper, or if he runs out of whatever resource he needs to create the product of our organization, then he has to stop productivity and go and get the resource that he needs, staples, paper, whatever that is, and then he can come back, bring it back, but there's a downtime there. If I can be that enabler to make sure that that resource is at his disposal, it is at his reach, then that employee can be successful at 150%. But if I start taking away chunks of time where they have to provide their own resources, training is the same thing. It's funny, but I can throw a brand new person into a job and say, get at it. And if I don't train that employee, it's going to take them longer to figure out how to do the job than if I provided that training for them, then they could produce quicker and at a more efficient pace. And then finally, if you're in the manager's role, chances are your boss saw you as an innovator, remember, as that top green triangle, to be someone that could help the organization progress and get better and get bigger and get more efficient. So progress becomes part of every manager's role to create. So I didn't hire you as a manager so that you could just sit and be stagnant and not produce or get better and produce more and more and more employees, and to create better ways of tracking, to create better and more efficient ways of producing our product. So there's your 4 in your management roles. And again, the productivity is kind of where we're focusing in today. So breaking productivity down a little bit, it becomes engaging your employees, training your employees, motivating them, coaching them, giving them that perspective and motivation to do better, to make sure they understand where they at, where they fit. And then remember to recognize and reward your employees when they do well. So there's the breakdown of productivity a little bit. So let's go back to our case studies, and we'll look at those employee descriptions a little bit now. So here you got your typical employee. Again, he's professional, technically proficient, etc. He is an overachiever. He's always producing 150% of his quota. What does performance management look like with this employee? Where is this employee in Cubby's graph? Obviously, this is my blue employee. Where is he? He is definitely part of the culture. I make him feel part of the culture as a manager. So my performance management with this employee says, I'm going to make sure that he understands that he's my best employee. I'm going to do that through publicly praising him. I'm going to tell everybody on the team by patting him on the back and telling him what a great employee, which subliminally tells everybody on my team, this is, if you want my pats on the back, if you want my praise, this is what you need to look like. You need to act like him, you need to have a good attitude like this employee, and you need to produce at 150%. Overachieve. This employee is probably in the self-actualization. Here's the second employee description. If I come to work on time, he meets his expectations, but his skills aren't really as sharp, etc. This guy produces the quotas. This person produces only the expectation. Rarely goes over and rarely goes under. Usually meets right at the expectation because that's what I've asked him to do. However, this person never really does anything over and beyond. So where is this person? This probably is my yellow employee. Yellow, yeah, he's probably yellow because he is producing the quota. So he's just barely producing, but at the same time doesn't have a good attitude, isn't trying to do anything extra. And then where is he in this graph? He probably feels like he belongs. He's probably really comfortable with that, but you're not going to praise this person very much because he's not overproducing. You got to be careful. You don't want to pat this person on the back because then your green employees and everybody else in your organization is going to try to emulate or be like this employee. So here's the third description. Your chronically ill employee. Skills are lacking. He earns and burns leave, etc., etc. Not producing desired results. So where's this person in Cubby's graph? Obviously, this person is your red employee. Got a bad attitude, always tearing down the organization, tearing down, bringing down other employees with their bad attitude, and is not producing at this level. So again, why is this employee on your team? in your organization. This is an employee. When I go in and talk to people, and in higher level of management, I always come up and they identify a red employee, and I just go right back to them and say, so why is this person in your organization? And after a moment's thought, they always come back and say, boy, I don't know. They're not producing what I need, and they have a bad attitude, so they're affecting the overall engagement of everybody in the organization. Why do I still employ the same person? So now going on to Maslow's triangle, and we're looking at this and we're saying they probably don't feel like they belong to the organization. Hopefully they feel a little bit outcast because I'm not recognizing them. I'm definitely not praising them. And if I'm doing a good job of coaching them and training them, they probably feel like they're not actually cutting it, so they don't feel like they're part of the organization. Okay, so let's move on now and talk about the purpose of performance management. The purpose of performance management, well, that means we got to go back and define it. Who is it? So who, when we talk about performance management, we're talking about everyone in the organization. It's not just my employees, but it's my peers' employees. So everyone in the organization. Is it me? Absolutely. Is it my boss? Yes. Everyone's performance needs to be managed. Everyone needs to be looked at, talked about, examined, even if it's self-examination. How? We need to actually look at their performance, put it on the graph, look at where they are in Cubby's graph of engagement all the time, and then where do they fit in Maslow's triangle. When? It needs to be done daily. If not daily, weekly at the very least, and it's not a half hour or an hour exercise. It is simply a less than 5-minute exercise to take all of your 10 employees, whatever that might look like, and think about where do they fit on the graph. Great attitude, great productivity, blue. Next person, great attitude, not so great in productivity, green. Person needs green. So as we go through this graph, then we start to identify what they need. And then when I run into them, or I think about how I'm going to interact with them, oh yeah, this person is producing the minimums, but they've got a bad attitude. So when I interact with them, I need to identify that to them. Hey, you know what? Gosh, I wish when we got together as a team meeting, don't roll your eyes. Don't sit at the back and cross your arms and have a bad attitude. So when, again, I need all the time. It can't be a once-a-year thing. There is a need for a once-a-year thing, and we'll get to that here in just one second. Where sometimes it's on the spot. Sometimes it's over in a room away from work, and sometimes it's got to be in private. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And then we talked about what it is. So let's get to the question of why. Why do we manage people's performance? You know what? We manage performance because we need the organization to be aligned. We need people to understand what their role is, where they fit in the organization, and how they contribute, and are they contributing enough. That's why we do performance management. It's not so the organization gets a grade. It's so the employee knows how they're doing, where they fit, and are they producing the expected amount. Why not? Why don't we performance manage? You know what? It's not always a comfortable thing. But neither is riding a bicycle the first time. You have to get used to it. You have to start doing it on a daily basis or a weekly basis, and then it becomes very easy to do time and time again. What's the cost of not doing it? Organizational disalignment. You've got an organization that is going in 20 different directions because people don't know what their role is. You have people only producing the minimums or even not even producing the minimums because you haven't told them what they're doing. The costs are great. The cost of not doing performance management, for example, if you don't have anyone innovating and you're not inspiring someone to innovate through performance management, guess what? The organization's not going to grow. It's going to become very stagnant. And then finally, what are the benefits? It's that organizational alignment. It's that innovation. It's that we're going to grow. We're going to stay together. And your employees are going to love coming to work. They're going to love their jobs. And all of a sudden, when they love their jobs, guess what? Your performance management gets easier and easier because all you're doing is praising people instead of worrying about that sick leave abuser or worrying about that person that's got a bad attitude. Organizational alignment is what performance management is really all about. It's getting your people together all on the same page and all of us progressing together. Performance management should be a leadership activity, not a management activity. You are leading and talking and coaching people, not programs. But performance management is about people, and therefore it should be a leadership activity. Remember that management usually only produces the minimums because we declare what a quota is, and then people work to achieve that quota, and then they stop working. But if you're leading and you're inspiring and influencing your people, then you create relationships, which creates devotion, which creates overachieving. They will want to do more to please you as a manager. Again, a leadership type activity. Effective, we're going to wrap up here with this last section. An effective leader manages performance. How? They do it daily and timely. We'll talk about that again in just a second. Recognizes both positive and negative performance. They acknowledge or they reward that positive performance on a regular basis, usually on the spot. As someone does something good, we're going to praise them immediately in a public forum with everyone else so people know this is the person I want you to be like. This is the behavior. This is the job performance. This is the level I want people to operate at. And then an effective leader always documents all his performance. And they do that mostly so the organization and whoever comes in behind you has that information. But there's also the fact that if I do it on a daily and timely basis, then at the end of the year when my requirements is I've got to do performance management, guess what? It's already done. All I got to do is copy and paste it over to the document. So let's talk about timing. Yes, there's annual. There's also as needed. So as you got people that are screwing up or they're not producing or then maybe they're overproducing, it's as needed. And then you've got on the spot. When is on the spot effective or when does it need to be present? It's like the little 3-year-old that starts across the street. When you have a 3-year-old that's going to run across the street, you don't do it at the end of the year and say, hey, I don't want you to run across the street anymore. You have to do it on the spot. Hey, get out of the street. You pull them back. You sternly warn them. You can't walk in the street, and you show them why and how that's going to affect them, what that's going to do to your family organization if they walk into the street. And so it's an on-the-spot correction. But you got to be careful that you're not always doing on-the-spots. If it's not safety, which remember is the first thing that a manager has to do, then you're not probably going to do it on the spot. You're going to do it over on the side. So here's just a quick little view of what a typical annual type performance management looks like. You set out at the beginning of the year. You set expectations. You check back in 3 or 4 months later. You remind them what the expectations. You give them perspective, so you're coaching them on what it is that they're doing. And then halfway through, you say, look, here's where I think you are. Remember the expectations. This is what I want you to do. Yeah, remember we talked about that 6 months ago? Well, this is where I think you're at today. And then at the end of the cycle, you've got to sit down and say, so this is how you did. This is a very broad brush, a very broad spectrum, but this is kind of the cycle. And then, of course, it starts again right away, where now you're going to do a whole other year. This is fair to the employee. This is fair to the organization. You've got to have this kind of thing going on. And then, of course, most of your HR organizations, within your organization, most of your HR organizations are going to have that built in so that you have to get that information back to them. So as needed or on the spot, again, I talked about when those happen, but I suggest that you use the STAR method. So STAR looks like this. It's a situation. This is what the situation was. These are the players. These are the employees that were there. This is what actually happened. And the task, this is what you should have been doing when the situation occurred. So in other words, at 10 a.m., John and Mary and Steve were all in the room together, and you were supposed to be producing widgets. You were supposed to be stapling these pieces of paper together to create this book, etc., etc. What actually happened was Mary yelled at Steve and John which is the person you're talking to, you actually got mad and you threw the paper at Mary and et cetera, et cetera. And this is what actually happened. So here's the situation. This is what should have happened. And this is what I was expecting, what your outcome should be, but this is what actually happened. And now it's super important that second A is to bring it back into this is how your task aligns with the organization. And the misbehavior that happened or the overachievement that happened, either way, this is how it affects the organization. Your misbehavior means that we're not going to make our quotas as an organization. Our team is not going to make its quota this month because we had one day where we didn't produce anything because these things happened and affected us. Or just the opposite. If you overachieve, then as an organization, we're going to overachieve, grow, and guess what? That's job stability. That's sustainability. That's how our organization is going to continue to grow. We're all going to have opportunities to do more and bigger and better things. And then the result is if you keep doing this, this is what's going to happen. This is what success looks like. This is what I want you to change, or this is what I want you to continue doing. So the STAR method is just a way of actually talking to the employee. If I sit you down and I say, this is what happened, this is what I expected to happen, this is what actually happened, and then guess what? This is how it affects us as an organization, and this is what we're going to do in the future. So we're going to project out, we're going to make some goals. So here we go with 10 practical tips. This is kind of where I'm wrapping up, but here's 10 practical tips to help you manage your performance. Kind of race through these pretty fast. Ignoring poor performers, lower morale, diminishes quality. The most effective way to resolve inadequate performance is to have people self-evaluate. In other words, ask them, how was your performance? Don't lay it out there. Don't make it a lecture. Get them involved. And then when you do ask questions, here's some of the kind of questions that you could ask there. How do you see your performance? How do you see yourself contributing to the overall success of the organization? And then here's the next three. Low performance often has more than one cause. So again, you've got to ask them, how would you describe your current state of affairs? And let them, because they will tell you more than you know, and that's what you need to find out. You need to find out the whole story of why things happen the way they do. Engage motivation by linking it to the results rather than performance. Don't focus in on their negative performance, but how it affects the organization. Get them to see, especially the younger generation, they want to see how they fit and how what they perform fits into the overall success, how they contribute to the overall success and performance of the organization. They want to know how if what they're doing is good. And then communicate quality. Life comes before the work begins. And here's the last, or here's 7, 8, 9. If the task is intrinsically motivating, I'll let you read these. I kind of need to wrap up here. Menial tasks, low autonomy, usually lead to lower performance. If you let people manage themselves, they usually perform at a higher level. Asking people for their performance improvement suggestions. So let them manage their own performance. How are you going to do better this next year? Or how are you going to do better in the future? Then they will usually challenge themselves even more than you would challenge them. That's just kind of a typical thing. And then number 10, the biggest one is make improving performance part of your culture rather than an annual ritual. It can't just be that once-a-year thing. Again, when a child is going to walk across the street, you don't want them to, you got to just take care of it right now. That's managing performance. And also, if that child is doing something good, then you pat them on the back. You reward their positive behavior. You got to do that right now. You can't go wait till the end of the year and say, remember back when 6 months ago you did this and this? That was really good. Do that again. Now, you got to do that more. It's got to be daily or weekly, at least. And my last item here, and this is how I learned to manage performance. So I'm pretty uppity. You could tell how fast I talk. If you could see me, I'm using my hands. I'm pacing around it all the time when I'm talking to people. And I tell people that I'm addicted to LSD. LSD is super addictive. If you don't, it is a drug. For those of you that don't know, but I'm probably sure that most of you know what LSD is. And I tell people that I'm addicted to LSD. It's very actually contagious. So when people are around me, they realize, wow, I want that. Not only that, but once you start doing it, then guess what? It's more and more and more all the time. I got to have more. But here's the interesting thing. So LSD for me spells lift someone daily. That's what LSD for me. So as I go around and I look at my employees, I recognize that I really need to lift them. I need to help them grow, help them see themselves as a bigger and better, stronger thing. So there's a quote out there I use a lot, and that is, if you inspire or influence someone to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. And that's how I get to lift someone daily. I really focus in on this a lot. I always look at my employees and I think, what can I say or do for them today that will help them see themselves as bigger and better than they already do? How can they improve? And remember that through that growth in them, I grow as a manager. So my charge to you is to get addicted. Find LSD in your life and help your employees and those around you and your family, even strangers. LSD is a great concept. And with that, I'll close out by just saying, get with me and get addicted to LSD, because if you can find ways to lift those around you, you will find ways, and your improvement in yourself will be great. So thanks so much for your time, and we're going to open it up for questions now.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. Thank you for a very interesting and intriguing presentation. Folks, we are open for the question and answers. You can either put your question in the chat box or you can raise the hand icon available on your webinar console. So we have first question here. It's from Zainab Ahmed, and the question is, how can I identify people who are good to hire in the first place? I've put out ads and gotten CVs and not very inspired by the people applying.
Great question, and thank you for asking. So I do quite a bit of work with organizations in their hiring process. And hiring has changed, in my opinion, hiring has changed in the last 20 years dramatically, where employees that are potential employees, that I need to look at, yes, they need to have some elements of a resume, education, prior work experience, etc. But the most important thing to look at is how they fit in my culture. And so there I'm looking at, again, are people really looking at, do they really understand that how I want them to be in my organization? Are they going to be self-motivated? Are they going to be innovative? Are they going to be receptive to change, technological changes, all those things? All those kind of things are the things that people, that before I ever hire someone, that's what I really need to know. So when I sit down and I interview someone to come into my organization, I'm looking at their attitude much more than their resume. If they've gotten to that point, they probably have the requirements that they need, and I can teach them and train them to do my functionality, what I need them to produce, but are they going to have a good attitude? So I hope that answers your question. If not, please follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. We have another question, and the question is, does performance management in actual delivers sustained success for an organization?
Absolutely. Again, so another quote I'll throw out there is that says that even if you're on the right track, if you just sit there, you'll get run over. So there's always progress, and there's always new and innovative technology and ways of doing business. And so if we just sit and we don't get innovative and we don't continue to progress as an organization, which also means we progress as individuals, remember, our success is your success. And if my team is stagnant, then the organization is going to remain stagnant. If we don't grow as a team and we don't grow as individuals, then the organization will not grow, which by the way, creates sustainability. If I am in a growth state and I'm always getting bigger, better, faster, stronger, then that is going to create sustainability in my organization. We're always going to exist. We're always going to be there and exist. I would suggest that if you're thinking about those kind of things, that you get on the internet and study the Kodak fall, the fall of the great organization of Kodak that went from being a 95% market share producer making 16 billion US dollars a year to extinction, to actually going out of business completely, going bankrupt. And it was because they sat back and said, we're good enough. And people will continue to come to us because we are good enough. And they didn't grow and progress as individuals and as an organization. And eventually everyone went past them and left them in the dust. So study up on the Kodak model, which is a great performance management model, in a negative light, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. I hope that answers the question for the attendee. We have another one, and the question is, how to make sure that the approach to performance management is comprehensive and it is covering different instruments in most activities in the organization?
Great question. I didn't cover that at all. Where do you find those metrics? How do you measure your employees? That really is best served not by someone 2 or 3 levels above you or separated from your organization. What I would say is if you're trying to come up with some measurements for your employees, I would go at the peer level. So I would go to fellow managers at the same level in the organization that I am, and I would sit down with them in meetings and brainstorm out what good performance looks like. What is your minimums? What does a good attitude look like? What does the quota look like for their production, et cetera, et cetera? And then you can outline out. And then as you do that as an organization, again, you will be aligned organizationally. Everyone in the organization will be doing the same thing. The danger of doing it yourself independently is that you will have higher or lower expectations than someone working next to you producing the same thing. And there's danger in that because you're not aligned. The danger in someone 3 or 4 levels away from you in the organization is that they don't really understand exactly what's going on. They don't know what the pitfalls are. They don't know what the resource problems are. They don't know how long it actually takes to produce something. And they don't know the personalities involved. And so they have a tendency to look back 3 levels down and estimate what can be done or underestimate what can be done. So it's best served if you as a supervisor or a manager with your peers can sit down and create those expectations and those performance levels that you would want all of your employees to do.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. We have another one, and the question is, even if the employees are all performing above expected levels, does an organization still need to manage their performance?
Yeah, so, wow, that's a great question. Interesting. Sometimes we have a tendency to not address our high performers. And what you need to remember, if you think about Cubby's graph, we've got that blue employee up there, and the graph is fluid. People are moving all the time. If I don't reward, thinking of Maslow's triangle, if I don't reward, recognize, and praise the good behavior will stop. If I have an employee or all of my employees are doing really, really good and I don't praise them, they will stop. I guarantee you they will stop doing at that high level. They will stop performing at the high level and they'll move to yellow because they start to think that they're not wanted, they're not appreciated, and that again is the role of the managers to make sure that my employees feel like they're part of my team's culture and that they're getting praised for their positive behavior. Super important to focus in. And then let's not discount or forget that by praising the employee, all of my employees, if they're all performing at a high level, but by praising the employee, I'm telling everybody that is looking at that employee, that is my best guy. That's the person, that's who I want you to perform like. Follow her. She's doing such a great job. Be like her. Perform like her. Have a good attitude like her. All of those kind of things. Be like that person. And you're setting them apart, and you're putting them kind of up on a pedestal, and encouraging, therefore, everyone else to act and perform like that person. Great question.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. We have one more question before we come to an end, and the question is, are performance management initiatives imposed from the top?
Could you repeat that for me?
Are performance management initiatives imposed from top?
From the top. So I think I understand this question, so again, the performance management is best served if you can do it yourself without having the guidelines and directions from the top of the organization. The top of the organization should, in my opinion, highly encourage performance management to occur, but in reality, they probably need to encourage those supervisors and managers as down through the organization to create their own levels of expectations, performance levels, and attitude levels. And again, not to go back to where I was, however, it is best served if those employees can do it at their level. So what needs to happen is, so let's turn this around, flip this the other way. If I'm in the middle of the organization, if I'm a first level supervisor or a manager or a director, I'm somewhere in the middle of the organization. If I jump out and I'm doing performance management well, then the result of that is going to be that my team is going to perform at a really high or optimum level. That being the case, I'm doing my job well, and when my boss looks at me and examines my performance, they're going to realize that I'm doing my job really well. And they're going to praise me, hopefully, for my good behavior and my good productivity. And so it turns itself around a little bit. If I'm doing well and I'm managing performance well, my team is going to be organizationally aligned, and they're going to be producing well. They're going to be doing, even overachieving, what the expectation would be. And therefore, when I am examined as a manager, my manager is going to say, wow, your team is producing at 150%. Congratulations. Way to go. I love what you're doing. Keep it up. Keep going. And that's what I try to tell when I go and I coach executives. That's exactly what I tell them is, hey, you really need to encourage your people to manage the performance, because they will be and do better, and therefore you've got to praise that behavior at the end of the day. I hope I answered that question correctly.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. Hopefully that answers the question from Mr. Azan. So, folks, that brings us towards the end of this webinar. Any concluding remarks from your side, Mr. Richard, before we end this session?
Gosh, I really appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the interaction. I'd love to be on a stage in front of you or in a classroom with you, because I'm much better at that. And then the last thing I'll just say is get addicted to LSD. If you can lift those around you, then you're going to grow as well, because you can only lift if you're standing above. So if you lift someone, then you know what? You're going to grow too. So thanks again for your time.
Well, I really want to thank you, Mr. Richard, on behalf of Madinah Institute of Leadership and Entrepreneurship, for your valuable time and information that you've shared with us. And thank you all of those who have participated in this webinar. We are recording this webinar, which will be uploaded on YouTube channel and Mile community. So please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org for updates or for downloading the soft copy of this presentation. With that, I'd like to end this webinar, and you all will be automatically dismissed once the session ends. So you all have a very good day, and thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Richard.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.